You're watching Grassroots Community TV, the nation's original community-operated television station, protecting and nurturing open channels of communication for the citizens of the Roaring Fork Valley since 1972.
All right. Good evening. I'm Rick LaFaro. I'm the Executive Director of Roaring Fork Conservancy. Thank you all for attending this special evening that we're hosting tonight. We are the watershed organization for the Roaring Fork watershed, which encompasses 4 counties, 3 major rivers, hundreds of tributaries, and although this topic is really in theory outside of the watershed that we focus on, it is very much right at the point where all of our water goes into the Colorado, and we felt that it's a very important topic to discuss this evening. So I want to thank the entire panel that we have this evening for agreeing to help educate the public on the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement and sort of what it really means and what it means for the public. So thank you, everyone. If you're already a member of the Conservancy, thank you for being a member. If you're interested in becoming a member, we have information outside. We also do have a donation jar outside to help cover some of the costs of this evening. So feel free to make a donation on your way out if you would. We also have a cash bar here this evening, so please feel free to quietly get up and get yourself a drink as you need it. Thanks so much to our sponsors of Carp New and Hanlon PC, Backbone Media, and Schmeezer Gordon Meyer. And really, this event is brought to you tonight by the River Stewards of the Roaring Fork Conservancy. And the River Stewards are a young professional outreach arm of Roaring Fork Conservancy that we started 4 years ago. And it started as an idea that we wanted to be able to reach a different demographic than most of the general education or school-based education programs and audiences that we reach. And so we had this idea, and 4 years later, this group is really doing great things in terms of helping the Conservancy by being ambassadors and really helping to further our message in education, and particularly with a demographic and sometimes topics that we as the organization don't normally cover. So I'd like to have those on the River Steward Steering Committee just quickly stand so I can introduce you and we can thank you all and get on with the evening. So Kara Armano, Jeff Conklin, Cal and Monica Vile, and Nick Kilborn are here on behalf of the River Stewards, and so they are really the ones hosting this evening. And at this point, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jeff Conklin and we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks again for being here.
Thanks, Rick. So, as Rick said, the River Stewards Group, we organize educational and social recreational events throughout the year around the Roaring Fork River. And this was one idea we had, and we have some others coming up, so kind of keep your heads up, and there'll be other events coming up soon. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers and then the format for the event, and then just kind of give a little intro. So we have 3 speakers. The first is going to be Peter Fleming. Peter, he is General Counsel for the Colorado River District. He's had that position since 2002. Peter serves on the Upper Colorado River Commission's Legal Committee, Executive Committee of the Water Law Section of the Colorado Bar Association. He frequently speaks on water, interstate compact, and governmental issues. Peter was previously a member of the law firm Carlson, Hammond, and Paddock down in Denver, where his practice focused on water rights, real property, environmental law, real estate, and government matters. So as to Peter's role in the CRCA negotiations, he, as I said, represented the River District, and the River District is the principal water policy and planning agency for the river basin within the state of Colorado, and is responsible for the conservation, use, protection, and development of Colorado's apportionment of the Colorado River. So really in this, as General Counsel, Peter kind of played he kind of quarterbacked negotiations for the West Slope in the CRCA negotiations. Our second speaker is Karl Hanlon. Karl, he grew up on a ranch on the Wyoming-Colorado border and attended the University of Wyoming for undergrad and Lewis and Clark for law school. Karl's been practicing water law in Glenwood since 1996. He used to be the city attorney for the city of Glenwood Springs, and he's now with Karp New Hanlon. His practice focuses on water law and policy, municipal law, special district law, and land use matters. And in the CRCA negotiations, he represented the city of Glenwood Springs and the city of Rifle. And then third is Mark Hermundstad. Mark was raised in Wisconsin, and he went to law school at CU. He's an attorney with Williams, Turner and Holmes down in Grand Junction. His practice focuses mainly on water law, and he represents a wide array of clients from domestic and irrigation providers, local governments, ditch companies, energy companies, individuals, ranchers, and farmers. Mark's involved with numerous water, professional, and charitable organizations and serves on many boards for those. In the CRCA negotiations, Mark represented the Grand Valley area users, including the Grand Valley Water Users Association, the Orchard Mesa Irrigation District, the Ute Water Conservancy District, the Palisade Irrigation District, the Mesa County Irrigation District, and the Grand Valley Irrigation Company. So also up here is Kara Armano. She's also on the River Stewards Steering Committee with me, and she's going to kind of help out with moderating duties. So as to the format, this is going to be a presentation and a conversation. Because this can be a complex subject, we kind of thought it was important to have Kara and I to help keep a balance between the topics for everyone, so we can, it'll be on a level that everyone can understand, and there'll also be content there for people that already have a pretty good familiarity with all these issues. So with that in mind, Peter and Karl and Mark are going to each talk for about 15 minutes. Kara and I are going to try to interrupt where we think there needs to be questions or more explanation. I've encouraged, the three of these guys know each other pretty well, so I've encouraged them to kind of interrupt each other where they think it's necessary. And we'll save some time at the end for audience questions and see how it goes. So as to the content for tonight, as you know, it's about the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement, and that's not to be confused with the Colorado River Compact, which is an interstate agreement between western states. The Colorado River Cooperative Agreement, the CRCA, it's an intrastate agreement between West Slope entities and Denver Water concerning the future use, development, and operation of water in the Colorado River Basin. The CRCA begins a long-term partnership between the parties, and it's really a framework for numerous activities by the parties that benefit water supply, water quality, recreation, and the environment on both sides of the Continental Divide. So Peter's going to talk a little bit about background, how the CRCA came to be, some of its main provisions. Then he's going to turn it over to Karl, who's going to talk about Middle River issues, the role of Shoshone and its calling water rights, and Rudai and other issues that affect the Middle River. And then lastly, Mark is going to talk about Lower River issues and touch on the Colorado River Compact. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Peter, and let's get started.
Thanks, Jeff. Can everybody hear me okay? My name's Peter Fleming. As Jeff said, I'm General Counsel for the Colorado River District. The River District is made up of 15 counties on the west side of the Continental Divide, basically everything in the Colorado main stem basin, the Yampa and White Rivers to the north of us, and the Gunnison River to the south, excluding the southwestern part of the state, Durango, Telluride, that area. That's part of another conservation district called the Southwestern Water Conservation District. River District was formed in 1937 as a, quote, counter-irritant to the proponents of a trans-mountain diversion project called the Colorado Big Thompson Project, which takes water out of the headwaters of the Colorado River near Granby in Grand Lake. Jeff asked me to talk about a number of things, a broad swath. So I'm going to go pretty fast, but and I'm going to violate one of your rules and ask the audience as well. If you have a question, go ahead and shout it out, because if I skip over something and it's something's not making sense or whatever, and it's just an opportune time, go ahead and shoot. Jeff said, not literally, Jeff said this was going to be informal, so let's make it informal. He asked me to give a background on Colorado water law, the plumbing of the Colorado main stem. Jeff, did you get those slides loaded? No. If I go.
So if you pointed at this, that one goes next, and that goes back, and then that's a laser.
This is next. Oh, that's next.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you. Sorry. The history of conflict between the West Slope and Denver that formed the basis or the incentive, if you will, for the parties to get together and try to negotiate this agreement called the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement. And then, as he said, the main points of the, just the highlights of the agreement itself before turning it over to Mark and Karl. In the water business, we try not to, but we often speak in water wonk terms, and sometimes those aren't commonly known to folks that don't deal with this stuff on a daily basis. If you do, great. If you don't, and to make matters worse, all three of us are attorneys, so that's even that makes it even more difficult. So again, if we use a colloquialism or something that you don't understand, please ask. To cut matters short on Colorado water law, basically, and I'm assuming you folks, because you're interested in the Roaring Fork Conservancy or your members thereof, you have a base knowledge of Colorado water law. But basically, for the purposes of this discussion, really what you need to know is, the prior appropriation system. Colorado, strict prior appropriation, first in time, first in right. You make a first claim to the water, you have a property right to the use of that water. The other thing that's probably important to know about this, about water law for this agreement is, for the most part, the water rights that we were dealing with in this agreement are old water rights that have been on the books for a long period of time. And today, to some extent, but to a large extent, back when those water rights were appropriated and decreed by the water courts, you didn't have to consider environmental impacts of the water project at issue. You didn't have to consider the recreational impacts or the impact to the local economy when you appropriated and took the water. And some of those harms, if you will, that occurred from some of those past water rights that are on the books today are some of the issues that we were trying to ameliorate and address in this agreement. The Colorado Cooperative Agreement is still a proposed agreement. In 2011, spring of 2011, we had a big ballyhoo agreement. The governor was there, a presentation where we made the proposed agreement public. A number of entities have signed the agreement. I think Karl's clients have signed the agreement. Denver Water has signed the agreement. The River District and Mark's clients have not yet signed the agreement. There's a couple of issues that still need to be wrapped up in the implementation phase before we sign the agreement. And by its terms, the agreement is not effective until all of the parties have executed the agreement. We're hoping for a month or two from now, but we'll see. Implementation has been complicated. It's involved numerous other entities that aren't parties to the agreement, most particularly the United States of America and the state of Colorado. State's not a party, but we need them to implement the agreement. Just a little bit about the geography. You've all probably know this rule, the 80-20 rule. 80% of the water in the state of Colorado falls in the form of rain and snow on the west side of the Continental Divide, that red line there. 20% of the people live there. 80% of the people live on the Front Range of Colorado. Well, what does that breed? That's. Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you.
You said the feds and the state are involved in implementing this agreement. Are you talking the Corps of Engineers? Are you talking that they're going to have enforcement capability? What's their involvement?
Thank you. The question is, what is the involvement of the feds in particular, I think, with regard to the agreement? And Primarily, it's the Bureau of Reclamation. The Bureau of Reclamation owns and operates a number of reservoirs on the west slope, but most pertinent to this agreement is Green Mountain Reservoir, which is located north of Silverthorne, in between Silverthorne and Kremling. Plays a huge role in western Colorado water. Good chunk of the water that's coming down through the Colorado River today is being released from Green Mountain Reservoir, as we speak. Mark and Karl are going to talk about the Shoshone Outage Protocol, and the Bureau of Reclamation plays an important part of that agreement. It's a side agreement to this agreement, but they will not have any enforcement rights in the agreement itself. So this is the way that the West Slope is historically looked at, the situation. 80% of the people is a lot of voting power on the Front Range. There's a lot of economic power, and doesn't give us on the West Slope a whole lot of bargaining power when it comes to what are we going to do when they come knocking for water on the West Slope to divert it to the East Slope for their own uses, which they have. Wrong button, sorry. Which they have done numerous times. This is a map of the main stem of the Colorado. You can see, let's see, that didn't work too well. Anyway, it's the lighted part of the map, of the large map of the state up there. The Shoshone Call down there by Glenwood Springs is an important thing to know. All these little red arrows on the Continental Divide are Trans Mountain diversion projects. About, I don't know, I'll probably get the number wrong, but somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000 acre feet of water are diverted annually on average. Some years it's a lot more, some years it's a lot less. This year would be much less. Across the Continental Divide for use on the Front Range. Let's see if it works there. Twin Lakes there, you all, I'm sure, are familiar with the Twin Lakes Tunnel. The Boosted and Busk Ivanhoe tunnels they take out of the Frying Pan and Roaring Fork rivers. The ones we're concerned about mostly today are the Roberts Tunnel, which is at the bottom of Dillon Reservoir, goes under the, I think it's one of the longest tunnels, water tunnels around, in the state at least. The Moffett Tunnel takes out of the Fraser system. Denver has two primary Trans Mountain diversion projects. The Blue River system, where you drive through I-70, you see Dillon Reservoir there. Roberts Tunnel's at the bottom of that. And the Moffett system, which has a large collection system, goes around the headwaters of the Fraser River. And if you've ever skied at Winter Park, you can see the tunnel going right through the pipeline going through the Continental Divide right there. Thanks. So this is what they did with the water when they got it over on the Front Range. And of course, we thought, maybe you could use it a little more efficiently. So you don't have to take as much from the West Slope. So those are some of the things that have caused strife, obviously. What was Denver's interest in this agreement? Well, Denver's system has limited storage on the Moffett. In other words, their water right on the West Slope would be in priority to divert in a big year like last year, and they could take more water to the Front Range if they had a place to put it. Well, they don't have, they can't take it if they can't use it, and they can't put it anywhere. They can't put it into storage. So Denver has proposed what's known as the Moffett Firming Project. They're going to expand Gross Reservoir, which is located on South Boulder Creek outside in Boulder County, and even when it's permitted, they will build that enlargement of that reservoir, and that will allow them to take more water in big years, like last year. You can bet they'll take more water in a year like last year than they otherwise would. Denver's Blue River system, the one where Dillon Reservoir, is relatively junior in priority. It's definitely junior to Green Mountain Reservoir, the reservoir we were talking about on the blue that's downstream of it, and senior in priority. Denver's Blue River rights are very valuable to Denver. They do produce a lot of yield. And in 1955, there was a historic settlement granted Denver water rights for its Blue River system. And pretty much every 10 years since 1955, there's been some form of litigation between the West Slope and Denver over the Blue River Decree. And the last 10 years have not been any exception. Denver had a conditional portion of its Blue River rights, meaning that water right wasn't fully developed yet. They had to go back to court to show, we still want to build this. Don't cancel it. We're still going to build the rest of this water right for the Roberts Tunnel. Even though the tunnel is complete, obviously, they haven't diverted through it the full amount that they're entitled to. So they filed an application with the court saying, we've been diligent. We want to develop this water right. This was in 2006. Well, we got in the case and we said, you may be diligent, you may have already built the thing, but you're not using it in accordance with your decree. You've got a decree, this Blue River Decree that was entered in 1955, and it has provisions in there, and you're not complying with those provisions. The two most important ones from our perspective were, related to those people that were sort of willy-nilly throwing the water around, is that Denver can use that water only in the Denver metropolitan area. Well, what does that mean? That was the $100,000 question. Nobody knew what that means. Denver said it's whatever we say it is. It is what it is. And we said, no, it has to have some limitation for the court, for the decree to have any meaning. And so we litigated that issue. We also litigated the provision in the decree that said, the water that you bring over, Denver, you have to reuse that water. And you have to reuse it as much as you can so that, these weren't the exact words of the decree, but any person would read it to mean, so that your demand on the west slope is reduced. And Denver said, well, we're reusing as much as we can, and go talk to somebody else. So we sued over that issue as well. Now, before we got to the point where the court was going to issue a ruling, Denver and the West Slope and Mark's clients and Karl's clients all got together and we decided, we might be able to work something out here where we can withdraw our opposition to these legal claims and come up with an agreement that works better than if we win. And Denver thought, well, we might be able to get an agreement that works better for us than if we win as well. And I think the agreement that we've crafted, despite the fact that we have yet to sign it, provides better benefits to the West Slope, provides better benefits to Denver, and the state as a whole than if either side had, sort of won 100% on the legal issues. So some of the West Slope interests, addressing some of those stream flow and restoration issues that weren't dealt with previously, providing water for consumptive use on the West Slope. In Summit County, just by way of example, is among the most expensive water in the state. Upstream of Dillon, because all of the water is effectively claimed by the United States at Green Mountain and Denver at Dillon. All of the water there is about $35,000 an acre foot. And an acre foot, you often hear, is enough for a family of 4 or 2 families of 4, depending upon who you're talking to. It's expensive water. And so if Denver can help the West Slope get some more water for consumptive use in Breckenridge area and so forth, that's a big benefit. Resolve those Blue River Decree issues, the metro area and the reuse provision, and a number of other ones too. Protect recreation assets on the West Slope. Preserving the Shoshone flow. Karl and Mark are going to talk about that. Conservation and reuse, I mentioned that. Define the Denver water service area, that's the metro area. That's the issue. What about the Roaring Fork? Well, you folks are obviously interested in the Roaring Fork River. What does the Roaring Fork Basin get out of this agreement that we've negotiated? It deals a lot with protections on the Fraser River and the Blue River and down in the Grand Valley and the Middle River, we call from in the Glenwood area. Really, nothing specifically direct. There are 2 provisions. Number one, I would say is Shoshone. The Roaring Fork Basin as a whole, economically and geographically, gets a benefit out of the Shoshone Outage Protocol that Karl and Mark will talk about more. But also the abstention provisions that I'll talk about in a minute. This limitation on Denver's service area has a number of exceptions. So what are the key provisions of the agreement? Fixed Denver service area Denver commits to further reuse and conservation. So this fixing of the surface area, if you go to Denver's website, Denver Water, you know, I think you can look on their website and see what their service area is. That's it. It's not going to expand. And for the West Slope, you know, that's a good thing. However, there's lots of other folks on the Front Range that need water. And the agreement addresses that by saying the flexibility that Denver, that you have within your existing system, you can use some of that flexibility to help some of those folks out while not increasing your demand on the West Slope and also benefiting benefiting West Slope economically. We can work something out there.
Douglas County.
Correct. Yeah, all the Douglas County, the South Metro area, all these folks are almost entirely reliant on non-renewable groundwater. And Douglas County, probably other than Pitkin County maybe, is probably the most economically powerful, one of the most economically powerful counties in the state. And, you know, are you going to turn off domestic water to those folks? No. Are you they're going to keep permitting medians, you know, big wide green median strips and golf courses? Maybe, but the water is going to get more expensive for them, and parts of this agreement will encourage them to be more wise in their use of water as well. Yes?
What about the Boulder area and then the Colorado Springs area? Because when you say Front Range, sometimes that's, you know, there's a perception that all of the western slope water is going to the Front Range, which is not necessarily defined. But here you're saying that it's just Denver.
Right. Well, this agreement is specific with Denver. Now, it does have some provisions, these abstention provisions, that will loop in other folks that today may not be served by Denver. But tomorrow, if Denver agrees to provide them some water, they will provide some limitations on those folks coming to the West Slope in the future. But as far as Boulder goes, yeah, Boulder is not served by Denver water, so they're not limited by this agreement at all. Colorado Springs, also completely separate system from Denver's, they're also not limited by this agreement. One thing that we'd hope, though, through this agreement is that it sets the framework for future cooperative efforts, whether it's with Denver or anybody else. It sort of sets a floor in many ways. You come to the West Slope, here's a good example of the things that you might be strongly encouraged to do if you want to get a cooperative water project up and running. Yes?
Is the boundary of the service area defined geographically, or is it defined by population or like the number of customers that you serve?
The question is, what's this boundaries that define, or the definition of the service area? Is it a geographic service area, or numbers or volume? It's geographic. The geographic line on a map, which we had a lot of discussions about. That was fun. But yeah, we talked about in the negotiations, instead of a geographic service area, a volumetric cap. Just say, you know, pick a number, 300,000 acre feet a year, no more. Don't come asking for more. There are various reasons why we didn't end up doing that. Somebody else had in the back, Cody?
Yeah, with these key provisions, what did you gain in the agreement that you would not have gained in the litigation?
I would say at least the bottom two, money, just off, you know, right off the bat. The agreement provides for through implementation measures, this $25 million that will be used on the West Slope for things like water treatment plants, upgrading water systems for various municipalities in the headwaters. No way we could have gotten that, I don't think, through litigation. Further consumptive use of water. I mean, if you sue somebody, they're not going to willingly give you additional water to develop for your own purposes, and that's one of the things we're getting here. So unlikely we would have gotten that. We might have gotten a fixed service area. We might have gotten. We had a famous exhibit that we discovered in the original Blue River decrees back in even before 1955, where Denver came to the court and said, the court said, where are you going to use this water? What are you going to do? And it's called Exhibit O, and it had it was a kind of just a rough sketch that somebody looked like they had prepared the night before the trial. And it said, here's where we serve today, here's where we're going to serve tomorrow. And if you put that up to their current service area, it didn't look anything like it, of course. It was smaller, but also, in fact, covered some areas that today Denver doesn't serve. So it was kind of a plus and a minus for us. But so it's possible we could have gotten a definition of the service area. Yes.
So the agreement is with the city of Denver, correct? Not the county that Denver's within.
The agreement is with the Denver acting by the city of Denver. Denver is a city and county. It's one and the same. But the agreement's with its water commissioners. And its water commissioners, Board of Water Commissioners, the Denver Water Board is appointed by the mayor of Denver.
So I'm confused about what the confusion is in terms of what Denver Metro is. Don't they have a geographic boundary already?
They have a boundary. Certainly the city and county of Denver has a boundary. But they will say they've always intended to serve, and in fact the historical records show that they always have served entities outside of the city and county itself. So, as far away as Arvada, Broomfield, they've served these areas for a long period of time. So the court would say, nothing in their charter prevents them from serving outside of the city and county. Jeff is mentioning for me to keep moving here, so I'm going to whip through the rest of the high points of the agreement, and then hopefully there'll be some time for additional comment. Here's a big one. Denver agrees that they're not going to come back on the west slope for additional trans-basin water diversions. We said, we'll withdraw our opposition to this Moffett project. Don't come knocking again. Denver will participate in the Shoshone Outage Protocol and will agree to a broad agreement on Green Mountain Reservoir, which is an entirely different seminar in itself. It would last a day and a half, but it's an integral part, an important part of this agreement. This abstentions that I talked about. So Denver, with this flexibility that Denver has in its system, if it decides in the future, well, it's actually in the process of doing it today, serving Douglas County with some extra water that it has, reuse water that it can't reuse, doesn't have the physical capability of reusing. Why let that water flow down the South Platte when somebody that's really needs it badly, Douglas County, needs it today? Well, so Denver can sell that water to those folks. Those folks in turn pay the pay the West Slope. The River District's going to hold the account. Pay the West Slope a charge of, I believe, 12.5% to 15% of whatever Denver charges them. And it's going to go into a West Slope account that will be used on the West Slope for things like stream restoration, water projects, water facilities, so forth and so on. At present, no revenue's coming in, but in the future, that could turn into a substantial stream of revenue for the West Slope. They also agree to these abstention provisions. Basically, that means within the Colorado mainstem basin, everywhere above the confluence of Gunnison River and the Colorado River in Grand Junction, if those folks get water from Denver, they're not going to come seeking for any water from the West Slope from that mainstem of the Colorado River permanently. And as to divisions 4, the Gunnison River Basin, and 6, and the Yampa and the White, they're going to abstain from developing trans-mountain diversion projects for a period of between 20 and 40 years, depending upon several factors. But that's an important point, and that's one of the things I think the Roaring Fork gets out of this. If Douglas County enters into an agreement with Denver to buy some water from Denver, as long as they're getting that water from Denver, they're not coming to the Roaring Fork Basin ever to get any more water. Now, I suppose they could terminate their agreement with Denver at some point in the future, but if you've got water in hand, why would you give that up for something that's unknown? For that, for all these benefits, the West Slope is going to waive its legal arguments that we talked about on the Blue River Decree. And we're going to withdraw our opposition to the Moffett project. There's a graph of Shoshone. They'll talk about that. There's Shoshone. And I just went over the abstentions. So I'll turn it over to...
One quick question
sure.
I had, just to, I know it's kind of probably a very complicated question, but who determines the amount, or how is it determined the amount of the amount of water that goes to the Trans Mountain diversions every year? And is that going to change with the new agreement?
That would change regardless. And the agreement will not have it doesn't expressly limit the amount that's going to go through these Trans Mountain diversion tunnels. For example, Denver's Blue River system. This map is a little tight, but the Blue River up by Silverthorne. Today, the amount that goes through the Roberts Tunnel on an annual basis is just subject to numerous balancing issues. How much water do they have in storage on the Front Range? How much has it been raining on the Front Range? This year, if you've driven past Dillon lately, it's getting drawn down pretty good. And that causes a lot of problems in Summit County. Certainly throughout the summer, boating on Dillon is a big economic boost to Summit County. The Frisco Marina is built in not the greatest place in the world. It is a reservoir, but it's also on one of the most shallow parts of the reservoir. So when the reservoir starts to get drawn down, that marina needs to move out into the reservoir pretty far, pretty quickly, and eventually it just gets left high and dry, and you can't use it. One of the things that the agreement provides is that Denver will, to the best it can, not bring Dillon down to that level at a certain point until later in the recreation season, once the people stop boating on Dillon. But as far as the amount of water that goes through the tunnels this year, they're gonna take a lot because it's been dry on the Front Range, just as it's been dry here. The reservoir was pretty full, so there's a lot that they can take through the tunnels. But we hope that the agreement will delay and moderate the average amount that goes through. We're not going to be able to control the super dry years and how much they take, and when they have a huge demands. They're just they built those reservoirs for a reason. They're going to use them, but over time, we hope that this agreement will moderate on average the amount that gets taken through. And what that will do is, in an average year following a dry year, the reservoir will recover more quickly. The recreation will be better because it'll get higher more quickly.
Peter, you got a lot to cover, but I had just one more question. Were there any big wish list items that the West Slope had in mind for the agreement that Denver Water was like, no way?
Well, when we were talking about volumetric limits a long, long time ago, it was sort of like going to buy a car. We would throw a number out, they would throw a number out, and eventually it became pretty clear that the two just weren't ever going to meet. So it would have been nice maybe to get a firm number that was low enough to make a difference. The numbers that we would eventually be able to agree upon were so high that we thought they weren't going to make a difference. We eventually concluded that the geographic limitation was going to provide a better limit for the West Slope.
Great, thanks.
I think they're cutting my time, or do I have?
Yeah, let's just go with one more question, and then we're gonna. I would think
Okay,
the other two presenters will be able to answer them as well.
I think I saw his hand up first. I'm sorry.
In the past, in these water issues, there was considerable concern on Denver side of just how many water meters they were even using. What percentage of people on the front slope used water meters? What's the update on that today? And did we get above 50% of the users on the Front Range using a water meter?
I don't have a real clear update on that. Any specifics. With respect to the Denver Water Board and their service area, though, the folks that they serve, I will say this: they're doing a pretty good job. I think I'm pretty sure they're almost all on meters. Chris is nodding yes. They're all on meters, and they have a rate system that encourages conservation, meaning if you use a ton of water, you're going to get charged higher. Denver does a good job. That was one of the arguments we were struggling with was in the negotiations and in the litigation was, they have this reuse provision in the decree, and we're saying you have to reuse all of it, and they're saying we're doing a pretty good job. And we were sort of struggling with how do we convince the court that they could do more if they've really got their hand on the trigger. Other areas on the Front Range, you know, the areas that are developing today, I think are all doing a good job of metering as well. It's the sort of the smaller areas that have been around for a while that you know, maybe haven't updated their systems quite as well. Thank you.
Hard to follow Peter because he's kind of encyclopedic in his knowledge, and I will tease him in his presentation. So I'm going to talk about Middle River issues, which, if I can, so which one is page up, page down, which one is going forward? That's forward, that's backwards. This is forward? Forward, yep. Okay, let's see. All right, this is a lot easier to use. Middle River, and I will apologize up front. I tend to move around a lot, so if you can't hear me because I'm going to walk away from the mic, I know I will. Judges yell at me. I just can't seem to help myself. So we're going to talk about the Middle River. Middle River is really that area from the Shoshone Call down to the Cameo Call. Mark's going to talk about the Cameo Call and what that means and how that operates down on the lower river. I'm going to take a little bit of time and talk about how important the Shoshone Call is and why, especially when you're talking about the Roaring Fork Basin, it's incredibly important to how the river system operates around us in the area that we live in. So as Peter pointed out, water rights in Colorado are first in time, first in right. So prior appropriations. If you got there first, you get to use the water. There's also another concept in water rights that is really important in terms of talking about Shoshone and how it affects our basin here in the Roaring Fork Valley. And that's the idea of consumptive versus non-consumptive uses. Consumptive uses are those things like you put water on your crops and your crops use it and it actually depletes the system. There's water taken out of the system. So not as much water goes back in as you take out and use. You'll see those for some industrial uses, manufacturing, those kinds of things. Up until relatively recently, there was really about one type of water right that was non-consumptive in the state of Colorado that was recognized as a beneficial use, and that was power production to spin a big turbine. And so what's unique about Shoshone is that it is a non-consumptive right that is very large. It's the senior right is about 1,250 CFS. And to put that volumetrically, if you can do the math, your garden hose running full open is about 1/10 of a CFS. So you can kind of calculate out, if you would like to, on what 1,250 CFS looks like. So what Shoshone does, it's also a very senior right, and it is senior to most all of these reservoirs that you see up here above it. And that's really important because we know that if Shoshone is operating, if the power plant is spinning its turbines and it's calling for water, that at least 1,250 CFS is going to hit the turbines to spin those turbines at Shoshone, which means that for the middle river, there's always water in the river. And it means for the upper river that to some extent, especially in environmental, when you're looking for water to go by, which for Summit County and Grand County is incredibly important, it means that it's pulling that water down the river, that it's at least making it halfway down the river system. And you'll note that another fun thing about Shoshone is it's almost right in the middle of the river system.
Karl, just to interrupt you for a second, will you explain for those that don't know where Shoshone takes the water out of the river, where it goes and where it comes back out? Just physically, so people
physically, sure. So as you're driving down I-70, you're going towards Denver, and you're contemplating why water runs uphill as you're driving that direction. When you get to the tunnel, the tunnel in the canyon, there is a roller dam, what's called a roller dam off to the side there, and that's where the water is being picked up. It's running through a long pipe, and it's dropping back in a few miles down the road that you already passed, where the Shoshone power plant is, and you will see on the side of the hill, on the side of the mountain, those big tubes coming down. Those are actually the penstocks coming down and spinning the turbine. That's where it gets its head to spin those big turbines. You remember a few years ago that they were big laid open pipes when it blew out. So anyway, that's where Shoshone is. And so you have a section of the river that winds up with no water between where it takes it out at the roller dam and where it puts it back in. But below that, you have this amount of water that's always going by. Why is that important to the Middle River? For my clients, when you talk about the Middle River, that's Glenwood and Rifle, and really I was brought in to talk about all the Middle River interests. There's two primary things that are going on for us in the Middle River. We always see that water going by, and so it's not a physical availability issue as much as it is in the upper river. But what's important is that we have a recreation industry, say in Glenwood Springs, it's incredibly dependent on, there's always 1,250 CFS of water going by. So when the Arkansas is dry, nobody can raft over there. All those folks come over here to Glenwood to raft. The other thing that does, and this relates to how Shoshone benefits and how this agreement benefits the Roaring Fork, is that, of course, Root Eye Reservoir is a very junior reservoir, and it's designed to make up trans mountain diversions, both going over into the Fry Arc, but also for water uses like Dan and Mark's clients farther on down. So if Shoshone isn't pulling that water, that 1,250 CFS, a lot of the water from the middle river down that needs to be made up, augmentation water, is going to come out of Root Eye Reservoir. And that has a couple of impacts. One, Root Eye, much like Dillon, levels go down, it's hard to recreate. The other thing it does is it tends to blow out the Frying Pan and the Roaring Fork rivers, and all you folks that like fish and like to fish, it really wreaks havoc on that ecosystem. So that's where the Shoshone Outage Protocol is incredibly important. I'm going to run through a couple of things here, and I know I'm going to try to go kind of fast. So what were the key provisions for the Middle River? And then we kind of understand how Shoshone fits into that. For Glenwood Springs, Denver Water agrees not to oppose a Glenwood Springs RICD, RICD, Recreational In-Channel Diversion. When I was talking about large non-consumptive uses that were never historically recognized, in the last 15, 20 years, this concept of a recreational in-channel diversion, whitewater park, that there are beneficial values to non-consumptive uses, at least in the recreation industry, is something that's now statutorily recognized in Colorado, which historically was not the case. Glenwood Springs sits at a unique position in that it is at the confluence of the Roaring Fork and the Colorado rivers. And so for Glenwood, they were looking for some way to backstop the Shoshone operations at 1,250 CFS, recognizing that all those reservoirs would want to fill if Shoshone doesn't exist, if it isn't calling for water, if it isn't operating. An important thing from a legal perspective is that you can have the cost of your project if you can get a number of opposers out of that project. And of course, Denver would be a major opposer if Glenwood were to create its own in-channel diversion, apply for that water right. They have a feature below the confluence already. They're looking at doing a feature above. Getting that legal battle out of the way is of a huge benefit to Glenwood Springs. Further down the river, though, the other thing that happens with flows, particularly from Shoshone and just in general, is that, as you know, the Colorado River, all these nice hot springs we have that we all benefit from, load the river with a lot of salinity, a lot of total dissolved solids. And so the cost of treating that water, Rifle's a great example. They're looking at spending $27 million on a new water treatment plant. The number one complaint about the water in Rifle is how bad it tastes, and that's really a reflection of the quality of the water in the Colorado River. So they're spending a lot of money operationally to do RO filters, reverse osmosis filters, to improve the quality of the water. When Denver diverts, in times when the water levels are low and Shoshone isn't operating, there's a lot of whispering. I didn't know if there was. They're providing $500,000 to help offset operational costs that are increased by those lower water levels, because you have to change out your RO filters more regularly if the salinity content is higher, if water is being pulled off. And then they also, as part of the permitting for the gross reservoir enlargement, committing $1 million towards stream flow projects underneath that would enhance wild and scenic, which is a great thing, but they're proposing that as part of mitigation. And maybe afterwards, Peter and Mark can talk about how much the battle over mitigation versus enhancement, what that looked like during the course of 4 or 5 years of negotiations, and what that means. So anyway, that's the key provisions for the Middle River. And I kind of...
Not to interrupt you.
Oh, gotcha,
Wild
sorry.
and scenic ORVs, what's ORV stand for?
Outstanding recreational values. So, yes, sir.
Are there any provisions that limit the usage of the water during times of drought?
There are, and that's one of the things I'm going to kind of hop down through a couple of things that gave rise to the what we call the Shoshone Outage Protocol. And the first is in 2002. You guys will remember that drought 10 years ago. It's funny how there's 10-year cycle on the litigation and 10-year drought cycles. So in 2002, we had a very severe drought, and the River District really negotiated the first version of what we would call the Shoshone Outage Protocol. And basically that means that the major reservoir operators would act as if Shoshone were operating even if it weren't. In other words, they would make releases to keep the river in the condition that we'd all come to know it in. And so that really started kind of a pattern, I think, of cooperation that we hadn't seen previously. And there's some folks from the River District board here as well that were part of all of that, both on a staff and a board level. So then in 2007, something that was very troubling to those of us in the Middle River was the Xcel Denver Call Relaxation Agreement. And this gets to your point, is that in that 2007 agreement between Xcel and Denver, because of course Xcel owns the water right and the power plant, as part of their franchise negotiations with the city and county of Denver, they agreed to relax the call at Shoshone. In other words, they wouldn't be asking for as much water between March 14th and May 20th in severely dry years, so that Denver could fill its reservoirs farther upstream faster and in those times of drought. The concern for my clients in the Middle River, and I think for the Middle River in general, is an expansion of that 2007 agreement, so that suddenly they were taking water past May 20th. It's the first week of June, and there's no water in the river for rafting in Glenwood Springs and recreation, and the spring kind of early summer fishing that should be really good on the frying pan isn't, because there's 600 CFS coming down the frying pan and coming out the Roaring Fork to make up, to get irrigation water down to the Grand Valley to Mark's clients down at the Cameo Call. So from my client's perspective, the negotiation of some kind of a resolution to making sure that either Shoshone operates indefinitely, be that as a publicly owned, in terms of public entity owned power plant and water right, if Xcel would ever be interested in doing that, which a portion of the agreement lays out, sort of exploring those options with Xcel, or finding a workaround so that we're not reliant on whether or not the plant keeps operating, because it's over 100 years old and it has a tendency to break down. And when it breaks down, it tends to wreak havoc on the way the water system is administered. So that gave rise to the Shoshone Outage Protocol, which is this graph that Peter had kind of thrown up. The same one is basically what you're trying to do is maintain that green line, regardless of whether or not Shoshone is operating. Like this summer when it was down, one turbine was down because they're having problems with the dam. Early in the year there were releases made as if Shoshone were operating at full capacity, and that's just a cooperative agreement between the major reservoir operators. This is kind of running through how that works and why here it's so important, because with Route I there again being below Shoshone on the river system, it tends to be the one that gets hit the hardest to make up water when all those other senior water rights can divert that would normally be releasing, or not even that they're diverting, just holding. Yes, sir.
You mentioned several times the recreational usage of water, and as if that had some significant leverage in these negotiations. And I just wonder, why is that? Because, I mean, there are no real concrete water rights for rafting or fly fishing. I mean, how is it that those rise to the level of being significant in this legal environment?
The answer is they don't, which is why it was so important my client find some way to leverage them into a piece of the agreement that made it matter.
Okay.
I will be entirely honest with you.
Like water negotiations. Okay.
Yeah, it just it was what brought particularly Glenwood's concern about the recreation industry. The rafting industry, I think it was an 2004 study, it contributes something like $17 to $19 million to the local economy. And so it was just incredibly important to find a way to leverage the importance of Shoshone and the operations of Shoshone to maintain those moving forward.
So it feeds the legal fund.
Yeah, I mean, it does, in the sense that it is, if you think about what you come to Glenwood to do, for instance, or what you come to the Frying Pan or the Roaring Fork to do, what we do recreationally right now is based on keeping the rivers looking like they do now. And that's why, for those clients of mine and for the Middle River in general, I viewed it, and I think it's really important that we maintained that operational parameters that Shoshone always had, which is that 1,250 CFS, going over that, coming down the river regardless of whether it was operating or not. What that requires, though, is that Denver, the River District, and the Bureau of Rec agree to operate their reservoirs, Williams Fork, Wolford Mountain, and Green Mountain, as if the plant was still running. Obviously, in terms of the CRCA, the Bureau of Reclamation is not a party to that agreement. There is it lays out our aspirations in many respects as to how the outage protocol is going to work and what we're going to do with Shoshone. There is a separate agreement, the Shoshone Outage Protocol, to which the Bureau of Reclamation is a party. Much like this one, that agreement is moving along. It's maybe a little bit behind the main CRCA at this point, but we're getting close to a final draft that hopefully will work its way up through Department of Interior for approval. That is going to be very important in terms of the long-term ability to operate Shoshone in that manner. Sure thing.
If the Shoshone Call goes out in mid-August and they need to increase flows to the turbines, is that a senior right to Denver's rights of transcontinental divide
Yes.
water?
Do you mean if the river level drops below, the naturally occurring river level drops below 1,250 CFS? Actually, it usually happens in like late June. But if that happens, it is senior to those reservoirs which would be holding water or filling above it. So the answer is yes. That's why
so
it's.
What happens then? They release more water.
They release more water out
in Green Mountain,
or don't hold as much. Don't fill as much. So to make up that water. And recognizing that, and Peter's probably a lot better at describing the whole operations of Green Mountain and the historic user pool, and how that plays into the amount of water that is going over Shoshone as well, which is kind of a whole nother conversation. But
I guess just to clarify the question, the idea is that there's not enough natural water in the stream, and that Excel may or may not want that water to come down.
Right.
But what everyone has decided is we're going to make sure those releases occur anyway. In a nutshell.
To some degree.
Okay.
And I think Mark can talk. I'm going to let Mark talk about when that doesn't actually happen that way.
There have been rumors about the possibility of Excel just, ceasing operations, or, is there? Would that disrupt this whole thing?
Well, yes and no. I mean, no in the sense that that's really what the outage protocol is about, is how do we operate it if Shoshone, if Excel doesn't operate the power plant, how do we deal with that? And that's really what the outage protocol talks about is, okay, here's how we're going to operate the river system, regardless of what Excel is doing. Whether
so
they
goes that far.
It goes that far. And that's really what this previous slide, these reservoir operations really go to. And I'm going to kind of wrap up here on some related agreements that are out there, the amendments to the Windy Gap Agreement and Windy Gap Firming, Green Mountain Reservoir Administration, and then the Shoshone Outage Protocol that I've been talking about. There are still other agreements out there that need to be buttoned up as well that all relate to these, to the CRCA. I will say, though, from the standpoint of 28 signatories, 4, 5, 6 years of negotiating time, it's both monumental and historic in the sense that we got as far as we did. My clients have signed off on it. We're slowly working our way down the river as implementation goes. A lot of other moving pieces. So I think there's also the Wild and Scenic work that's going on. What's the 10825 water, which there again I'm going to not spend any time on just because of the length of both my presentation and Peter, so we can get to Mark, who's going to talk about the lower river and how this all relates to the world in the Grand Valley. So thank you.
Everyone still awake? Yeah. Okay, good.
Peter and Karl both did a great job, and I want to take this time to recognize Peter's quarterbacking skills in this whole process. The River District has been at the forefront of these negotiations, and poor Peter has had to herd all the cats on the western slope and try to keep things moving in the right direction. He's done a marvelous job, so I wanted to recognize that. Jeff said that I represented 6 clients down in the Grand Valley. I actually only represent 3. And the other ones I'm sort of speaking for in these negotiations. We hold periodic meetings in the Grand Valley to bring everybody up to speed. But there are basically 2 municipal water providers that have been involved in the negotiations, and I don't know, 5 or 6 irrigation entities, and I represent 3 of those, one of the domestic water providers and 2 irrigation entities. Let's see if, oh, wrong middle one. There we go. This is a map of the Grand Valley, and the stuff I added to it didn't show up. But the Colorado River comes into the Grand Valley on the right-hand side here from the east and runs east to west through the Grand Valley. The town of Palisade is over here on the east side. Grand Junction is down in the middle, and Fruita is halfway up the ascending limb of the Colorado River on the west side. This is a map showing the irrigated acreage in the Grand Valley. Most of this is irrigated by Colorado River water. The stuff down in the lower left is Gunnison River water, but that's just a small part of the irrigated acreage in the Grand Valley. The Cameo Call has been mentioned tonight. The Cameo Call is basically the aggregation of the senior water rights owned by the irrigation entities that come out of the Colorado River. The Cameo Call consists of 2 different diversions from the Colorado River. There's one diversion near Palisade right here that takes water for the Grand Valley Irrigation Company, and then the rest of the Cameo Call takes its water out of the Colorado River 6 or 7 miles upstream near the entrance or the exit off of the interstate that goes up to Powderhorn. That's the Highline Canal and a couple of other canals. It's Orchard Mesa Irrigation District, Highline, and then a couple of smaller irrigation districts. That's correct. And so the Cameo Call altogether is a little under 2,000 CFS, so it's a pretty substantial amount of water. And the priorities for the Cameo Call water rights are relatively senior in the Colorado River Basin. And so if these irrigation entities cannot get their water, they can place a call and get the water down to them. I'll explain some of the problems with that as I go forward here a little bit. The other thing I wanted to point out on this map is that there are several municipal water providers in the Grand Valley. The town of Palisade has its own system. City of Grand Junction has its own system. There's a little, not a little, but another water district between Grand Junction and Palisade that serves that area. And then the Ute Water Conservancy District, which is one of my clients, serves the remainder of this area of the Grand Valley. And basically those domestic water providers overlay this, the irrigation providers here. And so the irrigation providers and the domestic water providers really have similar interests because they're serving the same customers. And so the municipal providers and the irrigation providers have gotten together in these negotiations and each recognize that though they serve different functions, they all serve the same people. And the interest of the Grand Valley is to make sure that the water keeps flowing down to the Grand Valley to serve those people. The Grand Valley obviously is at the end of the system here. We're down near the state line. We don't have some of the direct impacts that the headwaters counties had with Denver taking water out of the headwaters. So we don't have a lot of the direct impacts that some of the headwaters counties had. But we still have impacts from the Trans-Mountain diversions. If there's less water in the river, it impacts the water quality down in the Grand Valley because dilution really does help some of the, alleviate some of the water quality parameters like TDS. There's obviously, if water is taken out of the headwaters, there's less water flowing down through the Grand Valley. We need water not only for consumptive uses, as Karl was talking about, but also we're concerned about aesthetics in the Grand Valley. We have a riverfront trail that runs from Palisade or Clifton anyway, all the way down to Fruita, and the river is an important part of Grand Junction's heritage. So we want to make sure, just as everybody else along the river does, that there's a flow of water coming through the Grand Valley for both consumptive and non-consumptive purposes. From the start of these negotiations, we told everybody that the Grand Valley has two principal concerns in the negotiations. One is the maintenance of the Shoshone Call, as Karl was talking about, and the other is to ensure that Green Mountain Reservoir continues to operate as it was meant to operate. And so those have been our two interests in the cooperative agreement. And ironically, those are the two areas that have not been concluded yet in the cooperative agreement. We don't have the agreements in place for either of those, and that's the reason why my clients have not signed off on the cooperative agreement yet. We don't want to sign an agreement that's incomplete. And so hopefully we'll be able to have a more complete agreement here in the near future. I think we're winding down, but every time I say that, something gets mucked up. So we hope that doesn't happen. Let me talk about each of those two things in a little more detail. The Green Mountain Reservoir issue. As Peter mentioned, Green Mountain Reservoir was constructed in connection with the Colorado Big Thompson project, which was a federal reclamation project to take water to northeastern Colorado. Green Mountain Reservoir was built as compensation to the western slope for the impacts of taking that water over to northeastern Colorado. And there's a 100,000 acre-foot pool of water in Green Mountain Reservoir that's meant to take care of west slope interests, both water interests that were existing at the time of the project and future interests. That 100,000 acre feet has been divided up into different pools since then, but basically there's a 100,000 acre-foot pool of water that's dedicated to the western slope. A good portion of that water will flow down to the Grand Valley. This 100,000 acre feet is meant to supply irrigation and domestic uses along the Colorado River. And my clients obviously have fairly large irrigation interests and domestic interests down in the Grand Valley. So a lot of the water that's contained in that 100,000 acre foot pool will be released and flow down to the Grand Valley. So our interest in these negotiations was to make sure that reservoir continued to operate the way it was meant to. We've had good discussions over the last several years with East Slope and West Slope interests that have major interests in Green Mountain Reservoir. And ironically, both the East Slope and the West Slope has been pretty united in what we want to see happen with Green Mountain Reservoir. The problem really has been the state of Colorado in these negotiations. The state of Colorado has said that what the East Slope and the West Slope came up with is not something that the state could live with. And so we've spent a good 2 years negotiating with the state, trying to get them to come on board. And it's been a difficult process, but I think we're there. I'm not going to get into the weeds on what we've come up with on Green Mountain Reservoir. Jeff accused Peter and Karl and me of being water nerds. And he didn't want us to get down into the weeds on these things, so I'm not going to. But
I included myself in that.
And you did, you did. That's right. So I'm not going to get down into the nerd details, but the protocol that we've come up with is about 30 pages, single-spaced, and it goes into details ad nauseum on how Green Mountain Reservoir is going to operate. I think we resolved some issues in the protocol in the West Slope favor, and also defined exactly how the reservoir is going to operate, which gives some certainty to both Denver and to the Western Slope. So Green Mountain Reservoir is one big issue for us. The other big issue, as Karl talked about, is Shoshone. The Shoshone power plant is important to us down in the Grand Valley for a number of reasons. One benefit, obviously, of having that call in the middle of the river is to bring good, clean, high-quality water down at least to the Middle River. That then flows on down to the Grand Valley for use down in the Grand Valley. So we keep the high-quality water coming down to the Grand Valley. In addition, as you're probably all aware, there are endangered fish in the Colorado River down in the Grand Junction area. And those fish have to be reckoned with. They're protected by the Endangered Species Act. There's a programmatic biological opinion that covers the whole Colorado main stem. And part of that opinion that keeps, and part of the whole protocol for the fish to keep them alive is maintenance of the Shoshone flows. There are some provisions built into the whole system for the endangered fish that says if Shoshone goes away, then some of the water for the fish may not be available. And if the water for the fish is not available, that could impact development up and down the river. So really, we kind of look at the fish as being our friends. There's a lot of bad press that our endangered fish friends get, but they do help pull water down through the whole river system. And if Shoshone went away, if it's not calling, that could impact the ability of that to keep happening. In addition, the entire regimen of the Colorado River has been built around the assumption that the Shoshone Call is going to be there. And I mentioned to you that the Cameo Call water rights are fairly senior. So if Shoshone were not there, and the Grand Valley is not getting its irrigation water, the Cameo Call could place its call on the river and bring water down to the Grand Valley. There are a couple of problems with that. Number one, it takes 3 to 4 days for the water to get down to the Grand Valley once it's called from the upper river system. A lot of things can happen in 3 or 4 days. You can get rainstorms, the demands can go down, and so it's really hard to predict 3 or 4 days out what's going to happen with your canal system. It's much better to have a steady flow of water in the Colorado River coming down. It makes it a lot easier for our canal systems to operate. In addition, if we had to rely on the Cameo Call to moderate the river, it's going to impact who's going to be called out by us. If the Shoshone Call is operating, Shoshone is above Glenwood Springs, and it only can call out people above it. The Grand Valley Cameo Call is located at the bottom of the river, and so if we have to rely on the Grand Valley to call, we're going to start placing calls on water rights up the Roaring Fork River that wouldn't be called if Shoshone was the controlling right. And so you're going to see different water rights called out if we have to rely on the Grand Valley to be the moderator of the river. So I think it's important from a Middle River standpoint to recognize that this could happen if Shoshone goes away.
Mark, not to interrupt you,
yeah.
And you might get to this, but how did that work this year with the Shoshone Call and the Cameo Call and the interplay between the two?
Yeah, the Shoshone Call outage protocol was operated this year, even though we don't have an agreement in place. The parties informally operated under the Shoshone outage protocol. And according to my clients, that seemed to work pretty well for most of the year. However, there was a Grand Valley call on for most of the irrigation season. I don't know if it's still on. I think it probably is. But that's a function of it being so darn dry this year. Over the last 6 or 7 years, it's been pretty rare for the Cameo Call to actually be on for any appreciable length of time. So this year was a strange year because it's so dry. Yes?
On the diagram, everything was going into Shoshone and then down to the Cameo. They failed to, well, I did not see the Eagle River or the Crystal River. And how do they play in all of this?
Okay, the Eagle River comes in above Shoshone, and so if Shoshone is calling, it's going to call up the Eagle River. The Crystal River is below Shoshone. That comes into the Roaring Fork, and so it's not going to be called by Shoshone, but it would be called if my clients had to call the Cameo Call. Okay? Yes, sir.
Are there any limitations on how much water the energy companies can consume?
The question is, are there any limitations on how much water the energy companies can consume? Their consumption is going to be limited by a couple of factors. Number one, by their decrees. They have decrees for water rights, and so they can only divert as much as their decrees allow them. And then their water rights are are not super senior on the Colorado River. They're 50s, 60s eras water rights, and so their water rights could be called out by the Cameo Call, and so they might not have water legally available to them just because they're more junior. So those two things place limits on how much they can consume. Yes, ma'am.
On that same note, do they actually purchase water from other water right owners so they can go above and beyond what they already have access to on their rights?
Yeah, the question is, can energy companies buy other water rights and add them to their portfolio? The answer is yes, just like any other water right, person who wants a water right. Water rights are marketable. They're property that can be bought and sold. And so energy companies do buy other water rights and use those.
Can they do that on the Front Range in Denver as part of this agreement? And so can Denver actually sell their rights to that water to the energy companies that are drilling on the eastern plains?
There are going to be limits on that. As Peter talked about, there are territorial limits as to where Denver can provide water. So if an energy company is drilling on the eastern plains, that's going to be outside those territorial limits.
But they can tap into, like, fire hydrants, which they're doing in cities. They can come into a city with a tanker and fill it with water and then go back out to their property.
I suppose that's possible. It's I don't know how much that would consume, but I suppose something like that's possible. Yep. Yes, sir.
I have a two-part question.
Okay.
Does the Cameo Call affect the Gunnison River at all? And secondly, if the Cameo Call goes out and affects the Roaring Fork, is that a senior right to the transcontinental diversion above Route I?
Yes. The Cameo Call is above the confluence with the Gunnison, so the Cameo Call does not impact the Gunnison River. And the Grand Valley water rights are going to be senior to the Trans Mountain diversions at the headwaters of the Roaring Fork. Yep. Was there another question? Yes.
What does the state of Colorado dislike about this agreement?
What was the question?
What did the state of Colorado not like about this Green Mountain Reservoir Protocol agreement? They didn't like a number of things. They came in originally and said that the Blue River Decree did not say what it says, which is a weird position. But they were the way the Green Mountain Reservoir is designed to operate. There's both a power plant and a storage facility, and the federal government wants to both store water and produce electricity because that means dollars, and so they have to balance the storage versus the power production. And the state didn't like how the feds were proposing to divide up between those two things. And then there have been just a lot of little details about how things are supposed to operate that the state couldn't fit into their little box. And so we had to try to make that box bigger or round out the corners and stuff like that. It would take an hour to sit here and tell you all the things, but it was basically administrative things. They didn't think that this was being administered the way they wanted to see reservoirs administered around the state. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I know that all summer it's been a drought year, obviously, and the Shoshone Call has been under 1250, or the Dot-Zero gauge has been under 1250. It's 1100 right now, and has been for a while, and as well the Cameo gauge has been under 1930 or what it's at 1800, or I think it's at 1600 right now. And do you have any insight into why those have been underneath the below the call levels, and as well as if that would change in a drought year situation like this with the agreement?
Well, the reason it's happening this year is exactly what you said. It's a drought year. It's a really dry year, and so that's why the gauges are so low. There's been a lot of water released from Green Mountain Reservoir to try to maintain the stream flows, and so Green Mountain Reservoir is getting depleted. We were fortunate that it went into the year being full, and but the reason the gauges are down is because of the drought situation. I guess I don't foresee that the agreement, the cooperative agreement, is going to add substantially to the water flowing in the stream. That's not something that we were looking at happening. There's going to be some additions up in the headwaters of small amounts to maintain fisheries and things like that. And those small amounts, those amounts are small to the Grand Valley, but they're huge to people like Grand County and Summit County. And so we should see stream flows increase up in the upper river. And some of that will make its way down to the Grand Valley, but it's not going to be a huge chunk when you think that the Grand Valley's diversion is 2,000 CFS. And so there should be more water coming down, but it's not going to be a substantial amount for us.
So are you not calling the full call right now, or you don't have there's no water legally available to call?
Yeah, that's right. We're calling the full amount, and we're just everyone's shut off that's junior to that amount, and so Green Mountain Reservoir has to release water to make up the difference. And so when the natural stream flow falls so low, that's when Green Mountain Reservoir comes in to make up the difference.
And in this year, they can't make up the difference.
Well, it's making up the difference, but it's there's kind of a balancing act because at least my clients want to make sure that Green Mountain Reservoir lasts till the end of the season. And so you don't want to call it unless you absolutely need it. So my clients I know have been running short this year and have not called necessarily the full amount all the time. And so so there has been some cutting back just to try to maintain the amount in Green Mountain Reservoir. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not too familiar with the geology, but does fracking take away some of the river waters too? Fracking for gas, shale, oil?
You know, I mean,
maybe this is a touchy subject.
You know, I was going to say, I'm really glad everyone's asking questions, but I know Mark has a few more points to cover in talk, so maybe we can move forward and then we'll save some time at the end for these questions, because these are good questions.
Good.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Millions of gallons of water are used.
Okay, well, I'll let other people debate that. That's not my business. Let me mention one other benefit of the Shoshone Call, and I kind of alluded to this before, and that's that it helps maintain a steady flow in the Grand Valley. And I just wanted to show a couple of slides to illustrate that. Oh, maybe they didn't get up there. Oh, okay. Okay. This is a graph of the flows in the Colorado River at the Cameo gauge in 2008. And you'll see a fairly steady stream flow. The line is fairly steady across the top. You'll see a blip over on the left-hand side. And I'm not sure what that blip was. But that's one of the benefits of the Shoshone Call, is to maintain a steady stream flow down in the Grand Valley, which really helps us with our canal levels. Contrasted to this year, and you'll see that the river is all over the place this year with a big blip there on September 1st. What's happened this year is that the Cameo, or the Shoshone plant, is not operating fully, and they're doing work up at the Shoshone plant. And that big blip in the middle there is where they were doing some work on their diversion dam. And they basically closed the gates on the dam and filled up the dam so the flows went way down. And then they released, they opened up the gates again, and the flows spiked in the river. And it really makes it hard to operate our big canal systems. You just can't turn an ocean liner that fast. And our diversion facilities have huge gates. It's hard to fine-tune those things. And so if you have the river bouncing up and down like this, it's really hard to operate our canal system. Let me just close by talking for a couple of minutes about the Colorado River Compact. Jeff asked me to talk about that. I'm not a compact guru, so this is going to be really high level, and I'll just try to keep it brief. As Jeff mentioned, the cooperative agreement with Denver is an intrastate agreement. It's among parties within the state of Colorado, but the Colorado River is an interstate river. It runs from Colorado down to the California area. And so there's a law of the river that's developed over the years, and it's based on a compact that was negotiated in 1922. That compact divided the river up into the upper basin and the lower basin. The upper basin states are Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico. The lower basin states are Arizona and Nevada and California. And basically what the compact tried to do was divide the water between the upper basin and the lower basin states. So California, in very simple terms, is supposed to get on average about 7.5 million acre feet a year, the lower basin, not California. And the upper basin on average is supposed to get about 7.5 million acre feet a year. But the way the compact is written is if the lower basin doesn't get their allotment, and that's caused by water uses up in the upper basin has to be curtailed to make sure that the lower basin gets their water. There are going to be arguments about what the compact means, but in simple terms, that's what's supposed to happen. And so the concern here in Colorado is that if we overuse our water, we're going to deplete the river, and the lower basin is going to put basically a call on the upper basin and make us stop some of our water uses up here. There's also a 1948 compact that's just among the upper basin states that kind of divvies the water up between the upper basin states and talks about how the upper basin states are going to be curtailed if the lower basin states don't get enough water. And so we have the 1922 compact and the 48 compact that kind of talk about curtailing upper basin uses if we use too much water. There's an important qualification to that, and that's that the 1922 compact, the big master compact, says that it can't, the lower basin states can't curtail perfected water rights that were perfected by use when the compact was developed. There's some argument about whether the appropriate date is 1922 or 1929. But I think the prevailing view is that if your water right is a 1922 water right or older, then it cannot be curtailed if California is not getting its water. And so one important function that we as a state are looking at is identifying the pre-1922 water rights and trying to make sure that those are maintained. The cooperative agreement really doesn't get into compact issues very much. There's one provision in the cooperative agreement with Denver that says that the East Slope and the West Slope, or Denver and the West Slope, will cooperate to try to come up with a plan to prevent a curtailment because of water shortages to the lower basin. And so we're supposed to be negotiating with Denver to try to come up with a plan to make sure that we don't over-deplete the river. The River District, Peter's organization, has been working on a water banking concept to try to identify all the 1922 water rights and put them into a water bank that can be used to meet critical Colorado uses if and when a compact call occurs. And I assume that that's something that will be looked at as part of this cooperative agreement provision to try to get something like that in place, or some other curtailment option that staves off a call from the lower basin. So in a nutshell, that's the compact. If you have questions, ask Peter. But that's all I have.
Thanks, Mark. So if anyone else has any questions, I guess now's the time, and I'll let you direct them to the panel. And there's a microphone there for this, guys. Go ahead,
okay, I think this is probably for Peter, most likely. Because you talked about the provisions of the agreement, are there any provisions for use of the Colorado Water Trust during the administration of the agreement?
The question is, does the cooperative agreement address working with the Colorado Water Trust? And short answer is no. It doesn't exclude it, but it doesn't expressly contain a provision to work with the Colorado Water Trust, which is a non-profit organization that is basically dedicated to taking, working within Colorado's water rights system to improve environmental flows throughout the state when and where the opportunity arises. The River District has worked with the Water Trust in several instances, and I'm sure we'll continue to do so. The agreement does a lot of things that that are complementary to what the Water Trust is doing. My guess is that as the agreement continues to be implemented in the future, there will be more opportunity for working cooperatively with the Water Trust.
And Peter, can you make sure that microphone is turned on at the top end? Top one on the cord. Yeah. Make sure it's turned on.
It's covered by the tape.
Well, while we're sorting that out, you guys can go ahead. You can, sir, you can ask your next question.
Well, in terms of the compact, has there never been a lower basin state call? And why is that? And if that's, are we worried about that happening? Is it because it's as Mark point, or some of the complaining that there's a specific volume of water that so they're only due a certain volume of water.
Yeah, the general question is, has there ever been a so-called compact call, which is a little bit of a misnomer that we even in the water community use very frequently, by the lower basin states on the upper basin states? No, there has not. And the reason there has not is that they have always been able to make use of, they've never been shorted in their compact entitlement. In fact, those of us in the upper basin states would say not only have they used their compact entitlement, they've overused their compact entitlement. Mark mentioned 7.5 million acre feet. There's another provision that allocates another additional million acre feet to the lower basin states. So figure 8.5 million acre feet. On average, they use about 11 million acre feet. So they're way overusing their compact entitlement. What does that mean? That means the upper basin is not using its full entitlement. So as the upper basin continues to grow into its compact entitlement, and as there are extended drought periods that we will encounter in the future, whether they're caused by climate change or just the type of long-term droughts that occur historically, if we are using more water in the upper basin, there's the risk that we won't be delivering to the lower basin the full amount to which it's entitled to. At that point, you can be sure that they will issue try to curtail. I mean, we've always said that there's enough stuff to fight there that we don't stop using water in the upper basin until the Supreme Court tells us to, but we have to plan for it. We don't want to overdevelop our supplies willy-nilly and then all of a sudden be faced with a Supreme Court order that says, oh, you got to curtail all these uses, and do you turn off taps in Denver, or does Denver go running to the Grand Valley to buy out senior ag rights on the West Slope? Those are some of the things we're working on at the county. There's a hand back there.
Yeah. When I asked about the Crystal River and the Eagle River, I really didn't get the answer I was looking for. Is there any kind of diversion or collection on either of those two rivers that you can draw on them for a call?
So the question is, are there collection systems or reservoir structures on the Eagle River and the Crystal River that could be released during a period of call? Is that
right? You didn't answer that question.
Right. On the Eagle River, there's a couple of reservoirs. The largest reservoir in the Eagle River Basin is a Homestake Reservoir, which is a trans-mountain project owned by Colorado Springs and Aurora. So it's unlikely that water would be released from that reservoir to supplement West Slope streams. When a call goes up the Eagle River that's placed by, for example, the Shoshone Call, it would curtail diversions into Homestake. So Homestake being junior to the Shoshone right, if the Shoshone right is short of water and places a call, Homestake has to bypass what's ever available. But it's not going to be releasing additional amounts of water to supplement west slope stream flows. There's a smaller reservoir in the Eagle River Basin that is in part owned by the River District called the Eagle Park Reservoir up in the far headwaters of the Eagle. And that reservoir is used in part to supplement stream flows, but it's so small in size that the amounts are pretty small. In the Crystal River, there's really no existing structure for storage structure. There's some small reservoirs, but no big ones.
There's a lot of new energy permits on the Front Range, and I was just wondering where they plan on getting all that water from to do the drilling.
You know, I'm not an expert on that subject either, and so I don't know exactly where they're going to get water. I guess I would say in part that the volumes of water used for natural gas drilling, and then again, I'm not an expert, but in comparison to the volumes of water that generally we're talking about in this agreement, the volumes of water diverted by Mark's clients, by the Shoshone power plant, and by Denver are really pretty small. The volumes of water that might be eventually used either directly or associated with a shale oil facility, those are probably bigger and definitely more significant. But fracking, while and just the drilling process by itself, while if you look at it by itself, yeah, it's a lot of water. Relatively, in comparison terms, it's not as significant.
Ma'am?
Yeah, I have one question for Karl. And you mentioned about the water quality of Rifle. Right. And I'm just wondering if Glenwood Springs, since it's below the Shoshone outage, would be affected. Can you just touch on the water quality issues?
And I didn't realize I was running through. Glenwood Springs is unique in a couple of ways. While it sits on the Colorado River, it doesn't take its domestic supply from the Colorado River. It takes it from Grizzly Creek and No Name Creeks. Both of those water rights are significantly senior to Shoshone. So whether Shoshone is calling or not doesn't impact their diversions, and you can see their diversions when you're in the canyon as you're coming down to the No Name Tunnel. You can look up on the mountainside and see a pipe up there. That's actually the water pipe coming down the 24-inch line the raw water line that feeds the treatment plant here in Glenwood Springs.
Okay, and then also for Peter, can you just clarify the funding entities for the River District, and then why the state of Colorado would sort of be in conflict with the River District? I'm just maybe confused about that, and if the River District is funded by the state, why would they be against an agreement that would be
sure? And that's a good question. So it gives me an opportunity to clear up something. The question is, who funds the River District, and why is the state in conflict really with the River District? The River District is funded effectively two ways. There's a very small mill levy on property within its 15 county boundaries, and so like a fire protection district or something like that, folks that own property pay a small amount to the counties that eventually gets distributed to the River District. We are a quasi municipal entity, a subdivision of the state of Colorado, but we're not part of the state of Colorado. So we often work very complementary to the state of Colorado, and sometimes not so much. As a whole, the state has been very supportive of the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement. This agreement, the broad agreement that we're talking about today, the state views that very favorably. They look at it as a model to, getting around the problem of you got to serve people with water, and you got to, these folks are going to go looking for water on the Front Range, and this was a good example of how to do it the right way. That said, there have been parts of the agreement, as Mark said, with Green Mountain that have been, where you take this and you smack yourself over the head with it after the meeting. But if you put yourself in the state's shoes, you know this agreement's being negotiated for 4 or 5 years. You don't really, you hear little snippets of it. And then we come last year and we say, here's our agreement, implement it, help us to implement it. And we sort of drop it on their laps. And they've done a good job in trying to help us do that. And some parts have been a struggle and some parts have worked out great.
One question I have, just maybe kind of to start wrapping things up a little bit. Are there any other entities besides the Grand Valley who haven't signed the Colorado Cooperative Agreement? And if so, what are they waiting on, or do you see an end in sight?
Well, it's just frankly embarrassing because, and not for any specific person or entity's fault, but it just has taken a darn long time to get the thing signed. The other entity other than the River District and Mark's clients that has not signed it that I think of off the top of my head is the Middle Park Water Conservancy District. Similar type entity to the River District, a little bit smaller obviously in geographic scope and the scope of the things they cover. They cover Summit and Grand counties, so they're what we would call sort of a sibling district or of the River District. And they're sort of in the same boat we are. They've got an interest in the Shoshone Outage protocol, and they're kind of waiting on that as well.
Let's just go with one or two more questions so we can start wrapping it up. I know he's been
just a question about
waiting for a while.
enforcement. So if everybody signs this up, and 5 years down the road, Denver says, you know what, it's not working for us, and we're thirsty, and we need more water. Do you have some kind of extraordinary remedy in this, financial penalty, or is it just you have to go sue them and try to get a judge to enjoin what they're doing?
That's a great question. The question is, what are the enforcement mechanisms in the agreement? And there is no sort of trump card, if you will. There are a lot of provisions in the agreement that encourage us not to get to that point. For example, on the Shoshone Outage protocol, if Denver says, hey, we're not going to play this game anymore, we don't want to contribute water to the Colorado River when that Shoshone plant is down and we wouldn't otherwise have to deliver water, we've got needs to serve and we're not going to just release water to the West Slope. Well, Mark's clients have their finger on the trigger of something that they would be able to implement that would bring down a house of cards with respect to the endangered species in the 15-mile reach down the Grand Valley entity. And if they did that, it wouldn't be good for anybody, including us folks on the West Slope, but it really wouldn't be good for Denver either. And so there's things like that work to encourage us not to get into that situation. But the bottom line is it's a contract, and if somebody breaches it, we'll have to sue.
One more?
It seems like all 14 million acre feet is accounted for, but no one has addressed the future demands of the river, the population growth, climate change, natural gas extraction expanding exponentially. What are your opinions on these matters, and does the agreement or the compact take into consideration these things that we will have to face?
So the question is, what about new growth of water demands, and how does that fit within the framework of the compact, and does the agreement deal with that, or does the 1922 Colorado River Compact deal with that? Just as a point of clarification, the 14 million acre feet, I'm assuming you're referring to, is 7.5 for the upper basin, 7.5 for the lower basin, that's 15, plus a million for the, on top of that for the lower basin. That gets you to 16. Then you get 1.5 million, which Mark didn't mention, but in 1944, thank you, the United States entered into a treaty with Mexico, which was contemplated in 1922 but not addressed in the 22 Compact, to provide Mexico with 1.5 million acre feet. So tag that on too to the 16, you get to 17.5 million. Problem is there's not 17.5 million acre feet in the system in a reliable basis. Last year there was, this year not even close. But the compact deals with averages, 10-year averages. And to date, we've been lucky, and we have used some of the structures that we've developed in the past, namely Lake Powell and Lake Mead, to help Lake Powell to help the upper basin deliver that water to the lower basin. As we develop in the upper basin, as I was mentioning, whether it's an energy demand or any of the other items you mentioned, that's going to bring us closer to that so-called break point in terms of the compact. The compact, as Mark mentioned, provides that if the lower basin's not getting what they need, and the reason is because we're in the upper basin using too much water that was developed after 1922, well, then we have to stop all that use of the water that's causing the shortage that was developed after 1922. That's all the ski areas on the west slope, all of the trans-mountain diversions virtually, industry on the west slope, lots of new towns, so forth and so on, all post-22 water rights would have to cease. But what's that going to cause? Well, that's what we think that would cause is a bad situation where the folks that have, the energy companies that get curtailed, the trans-mountain diversion projects that go to big municipalities on the Front Range, come to the West Slope to start buying out West Slope water, pre-1922 water. And we think that's not a great thing to happen to the West Slope, and so that's part of the thing that Mark mentioned we're working on is a water bank concept. The cooperative agreement, as Mark mentioned, very brief, sort of mentioned that we'll work cooperatively with Denver. It's in Denver's interest because they want to make sure that they've got a supply of water if there is a curtailment by the lower basin states on the upper basin. So I hope that's responsive.
So is this on a 10-year loop or a 10-year cycle? Every 10 years it'll change or they'll readjust it?
It's not readjusted. It's a running average. The delivery, again, another misnomer. We often say delivery obligation, but it's really what the upper basin has to ensure is that on a long-term basis, the lower basin gets 75 million acre feet every 10-year period. So, the 10-year period ending 2011, they got, we were doing well because they got a big slug of water in 2011 because it was so wet. This year, it'll be interesting to see at the end of this year where that 10-year running average falls. If we have another couple of dry years, that 10-year running average starts to shrink down, and once it gets below, 85 million acre feet over 10 years, folks in the upper basin start to get pretty worried because there's different interpretations of the compact obligations about whether the lower basin states are going to be saying, hey, you folks in the upper basin, quit your uses.
Well, that's a lot to think about, and probably a good place to wrap up. I'm sure there are more questions out there, and maybe if these guys stick around for a little bit, you can ask them. I just wanted to thank Peter, Karl, and Mark again, and Kara for helping to moderate, and the Roaring Fork Conservancy in Cooperative, Colorado, and thanks to all of you guys for coming out. I know the Conservancy is really excited to see this public participation. So if we could give a round for the panel one more time. Thanks again. And feel free to have another drink back there.